Hey everybody, welcome to Mammoth Interactive's YouTube channel. First of all, I want to thank you for watching this video. And remember that this channel doesn't do Patreon. Instead, we sell our digital courses down below. And every single dollar that we get from the products you buy below goes into making more content. The best way to help out this channel and Mammoth Interactive is to subscribe to Mammoth Interactive's huge library of content. Get thousands of hours and hundreds of courses for a low price down below. We have a monthly option and a yearly option. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the video.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we are doing a project preview of our upcoming project, Build a Restful API with Express, Node, and MongoDB. First, we'll start a new Node project with an Express web server. We'll discuss what is Node and what is Express for those of you that have never used those tools before. Then we'll start a new Node project with an Express web server. We will also be using NodeMon to auto restart our server. Next, we will learn how to parse the body of a request to make it easier to get data from a client. Then we will learn how to build a Mongo database. To start, we will install Mongo database, and we'll talk about what is Mongo for those of you that have never built a database before. Then we will build a Mongo database that will be stored locally on your computer. And we'll build a Mongoose database schema to represent entries. After that, we will build an Express router to handle requests. So we'll build a router and we'll be able to send a response to the client when a client requests to visit a certain route or page of your site. So the client will send a request to the server and the server will send a response to the client. Then we'll learn how to implement HTTP requests that are part of RESTful API design. We'll start by implementing GET requests. First, we will learn how to get all of the entries from a database. So when a client or there is an API call that is made to the server to get all of the entries from a database, the server can access the database and then send all of the entries from a database to the client or via the API. Then we will learn how to perform a GET request where the client requests to get an entry based on a certain property. So this time, instead of just getting all of the entries in the database, we're searching for a specific entry or group of entries. After that, we'll learn how to implement a POST request. We will learn how to post a new database entry. So to allow the client or whatever is accessing the API to post or create a new entry in our database. Then we will implement a PUT request, which will allow the client to put a replacement entry based on a property. So you're replacing an entire entry in the database. After that, we will implement a patch request where a client wants to patch a property in an existing entry. So you're updating one property in your database, just one property of one entry. And finally, we'll implement the final HTTP request, part of RESTful API design, and that is the delete request, where we will learn how to delete an entry at a specific property, like an ID, inside of our database. And that will allow the client or whatever is accessing the API to request from the server to delete an entry. The server can delete the entry from the database and then send a response to the client. Either, yes, I deleted the entry, or I was not able to delete the entry, or the entry didn't even exist in the first place. And that is going to be our upcoming project. So let's get started in the next section.
Hello everyone, and welcome to day 6 of Hello Coding. Today you're going to learn how to build a website with Node.js. We're doing an introduction today, and you'll learn a lot more about Node later on in Hello Coding. We're going to get started by learning what is Node.js. Node.js is a JavaScript runtime that has several uses. One is to run a server. So Node.js can create a server and listen to incoming requests. This means that instead of building only local websites that you can visit on your computer and perhaps others could visit on their computer, instead you can build a shared site. So you can have one server with site content, and then different users can join the same instance of your site. This will open up a whole range of opportunities for you, because now you can build multiplayer sites such as multiplayer games or chat, or any website that you want to be updated live based on interaction from users on different computers. So now not only will you know how to build the front end of a website, which is the user interface, but you'll also learn how to build the back end of a website. So you'll learn how to create a server with Node.js and handle the back end of a server. So things like the database and any changes that you want to make based on one client or one visitor's interaction. As well, another use of Node.js is handling business logic. So with Node, you can connect to a database and handle requests from your site visitors. A database is used to store site data. For example, you could store profile information, you could store usernames, passwords, accounts. You could store different products if you were making an online store. So Node.js not only can build a server, but can also handle business logic. As well, it can validate input, so you can make sure you don't get invalid inputs or people trying to hack into your website. Another use of Node.js is to send responses. So your clients, your visitors will come to your website and send requests of where they want to go. And then you use your Node.js server to send a response. So you can send the user to different pages of your website. You can connect them to a chat room. You can join them into the game. And these responses come in many forms, such as rendered HTML. So your visitor will request to go to a page, and with your server, you will send them to a certain page of the site. This is different from just sending the user to a page locally via a reference link. Now we're going to learn how to send users to different pages with a server. And this is required for almost all websites, because some websites can be standalone, just visited on their computer if they're static. But for any complex project, any complex website, you will need a server, because you'll have multiple visitors and you'll have to get data from them and then update your website based on their data. For example, a visitor could come to your website and make an account, and you have to use a server to store their account information and then to send them to their account page, to send them to their shopping cart, to allow the user to visit a site, make a change, and then see that change the next day. For example, a to-do list that lasts for days on days instead of just being immediately cleaned when you refresh the page. And you do all of that with Node.js. There are, of course, alternatives, but Node.js is a very popular JavaScript runtime for creating a server. So you can send responses, including data like JSON data, which is a data type, and much more, whatever response you want to send. Let's discuss more about the client and server model of computing, because this can take a bit of time to grasp if you've never heard of it before. The client refers to any visitor of your site, and they are going to ask for services, meaning they want to go to a page, they want to make an account, they want to play a multiplayer game. And the client is going to send a request whenever they join or visit your website. They're sending a request to your server, and the server performs services in response. For example, it can make an account for the client, it can connect the client to a live game, and etc. Any task that your website needs. So in terms of a website and web development, the browser is the front end. It's the client. Whenever the user pulls up their browser and types in your website, they're instantly going to become a client. Now, the web server, that's the behind the scenes of your website. There is one web server, and then there are multiple clients. So any client that visits your website will connect to the same web server. And they do this online by using what's known as an HTTP request. And then the server sends an HTTP response, meaning these requests and responses, they're happening over the web. All right, and with the client is written in JavaScript, of course, with HTML, CSS as well. Perhaps you're using React, perhaps you're using Vue as your front-end framework. The browser is written in JavaScript, and typically with web servers, they can use a variety of languages like PHP, C#, and Ruby. And so that is an option for making a web server. You could create a web server in C#, for example, which is another programming language. But with Node.js, it allows everything to be done in JavaScript. So the browser, the front end of your website is written in JavaScript, and so is your web server. And that's the other benefit of Node.js, among all of its benefits, is that it allows you to work with JavaScript both on the front end of your website and on the back end of your website. JavaScript on the server looks like this. A person visits your website and they become a client, and then they send requests to the server to launch a site. And the server uses Node.js to do that. Then, after the server has received the request, they send the response back. So they send back the HTML page of dogs.com, for example. As well, the server can connect to a database. It can authenticate content, such as making sure that the password was entered correctly, making sure the user actually has an account. It can validate any input and perform other business logic. So the server can do quite a lot, and Node.js can as well. Other features of Node.js, not just creating a server. Because Node.js is a JavaScript runtime, it means it can do a lot. It can create utility scripts, it can provide you with build tools, and much, much more. But for just starting out, we're going to learn how we can use Node.js to create a server. So later on today, we're going to learn how we can build a website and use Node.js to serve it. This means we're going to not just make the front end of a website, but actually the back end of a website. So multiple users will be able to visit the website and see the same content and also update it. This really opens up the power of you as a web developer, because now you're going to be able to make much more complex sites, not just local games, but multiplayer games, and not just a to-do list that is one-time use only, but a to-do list that can be stored over time with an account, for example. All right, let's get started. In the next lecture, we're going to dive deep into coding with Node.js.
Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we are discussing how to install Node and NPM onto a Mac or Windows computer. So join me at the website nodejs.org and go to the Download tab. There we can download Node, and also this includes NPM. So here you can choose your installer, a Windows installer or a Mac OS installer, or even the source code. So if you have a Windows computer, use the Windows installer. If you have a Mac computer, use the Mac OS installer. Here for Windows, there's also options for 32-bit versus 64-bit. Likely your version of Windows is 64-bit because 32-bit is outdated. So choose the 64-bit version, or whichever one matches your computer, which is likely 64-bit. You can also install for Mac and even for Linux as well. Then just go through the steps of the installer. So you have to open up the MSI file or the package file, and you have to go through the steps of installation, just clicking through to install Node. And also NPM is going to be installed with Node. Then to check if you have Node and NPM, go to your terminal or command prompt or command line application. So here I am in my terminal, and I am going to check my Node version with the command node-v. Then I can check my version of NPM with npm-v. So you should get the results of which versions of Node and NPM you have. And if you don't, that means you have to reinstall or install in an alternate way. You can also install Node and NPM via version managers. The installer is not the only way. There are lots of ways to install Node and NPM. This is just the easiest. But if you're finding that the installer doesn't work, then you can try another option. Just go to the documentation for Node and NPM. And one thing to take note of is you should make sure to install Node and NPM into a global directory like users/your username, because that way you can use Node and NPM across all of the files inside of this folder. Because if you install Node and NPM into a subfolder, like just your project folder, then you'll only be able to use Node and NPM in that project folder. So you have to make sure to install it in some kind of global folder. And that is how you can install Node and NPM onto Mac, Windows, and as well Linux. And you can do that with the installer. So now that we have Node and NPM installed, we can put it to use in our project.
Hello everyone, and welcome to day 7 of Hello Coding. Today we're going to continue our exploration of back-end web development. We've learned about Node, and we're going to learn about a module in Node called Express that is going to teach us more about servers and back-end web development. We're going to today first build a simple website with Express, and then we're going to build a chat application in Express all in 1 hour. First, let's jump in and learn what is Express.js. Well, Express is a Node.js-based web framework. So in order to use Express, you will need Node. Express makes using Node.js even easier. And that is great for beginners like you, because you'll learn more about how to create and maintain servers in a very beginner-friendly manner. Now, why should you use Express? Well, Express allows us to write server code in JavaScript for websites and also mobile applications. Express is very well adopted and commonly used both in small and big companies alike. And Express is an easy entry to learning back-end web development and server-side coding, so it's a great place for a beginner. Here is an infographic about what Express does. Express manages your server code. So let's say your client joins your website. It could be your chat application, could be your store, could be your school, could be your multiplayer game. The client logs in and they make a request. And this request could be anything. It could be just joining the homepage. It could be creating an account. It could be moving around in your game. Whenever the client performs some action, they're sending a request to your server. Now, Node is the main server, but Express is a module of Node, so the two work together. They're intertwined. And Express is going to take the client requests and it's going to send them a response in return. It's going to perform what the client wants. For example, if the client wants to send a message to the chat board, the client will send the message to the server, and the server will then send their message to all the other clients. And in that way, you have a working chat board where everyone can talk to each other and see each other's messages. This is a huge step beyond just a local website where you log in and you send messages to yourself, but you can't communicate to anyone else. That's why back-end web development is so important to know. And by knowing both front-end and back-end web development, you will be what's known as a full-stack developer, meaning you know how to build not just the user interface, but also how to handle all this back-end stuff with servers, databases, etc. Now, Express can also use templating languages like ESX or Jade, where these help you create the template for each client, so the user interface. That is optional. And then also optionally, Express works with databases. So a database like Mongo or Firebase, these store your client data over time. So you could store every player that's ever played your game. You could store every chat message ever sent. You could store accounts such as usernames, passwords. You could store also products if you're running an online store. And Express is the middleware managing your whole website. All right, so now that we know what is Express, we're going to jump into actually getting our hands dirty and coding with Express. Express is quite an important topic. It's often a requirement for jobs, as is backend web development and Node.js. And it's going to help you not only add this very in-demand topic to your resume, but also it's going to help you learn more about JavaScript itself. Let's begin in the next lecture where we will start coding with Express.
Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we are starting our project of building a simple REST API that implements all of the different requests like get, put, post, patch, and delete. To get started, we will create our project and start our Node server with Express. So join me in your terminal application, also commonly called the command line or the command prompt, and we'll get started. CD into a folder that you want where you'll create your project, like documents. Here we're going to create a project folder with mkdir, the command make directory, and I'm going to call this hello rest. All right, then here I can hit enter, and now I can CD into hello rest. I now have that project folder. Okay, so we have our project folder. Next up, we are going to now initialize a new Node project via the Node Package Manager, NPM. So of course we have to have NPM and Node installed. Once we have it installed, we can use NPM to initialize a new project with NPM init. Here it's going to take you through writing out your package.json file, which contains your metadata for the project as well as any packages that you want to include later on. Here we can just press enter to go through all of these different pieces of data, like the name of our project, the description. We also have scripts if we want to have any shortcuts. And also this is the file where we would put in any packages or where packages would be added if we installed them. And we do want to install one package off the bat, and that is going to be Express. That way we can use Express to help us make a web server. So I'm going to use npm install Express inside of my project folder. Hit enter, and that is going to install our first dependency, Express, into our project. And you can see it appear in your package.json file as well. Okay, now that we have Express included in the project and we have our project created, our next step is going to be to actually create the file for our server. So let's create a new file on Unix and Linux, so on Mac or Linux. To create a new file, you use the touch command followed by the name of the file, like server.js. If you are on Windows, in a Windows command line, then you can use Notepad to create server.js. That is going to prompt you to create it, and then you can edit it in the Notepad or inside of a code editor, preferably. And of course, you could just create the file manually, just create a new file that has the JS extension. All right, so we've created our file. We can list out all of our contents. We see we have node modules. This folder was created inside of our project folder when we used npm init. This folder is what would contain all of our node modules like Express. We also have package.json, which has all of the metadata and the names of any dependencies like Express. We have package lock, which is just a locked version of package. And we have server.js, which we just created. Now, currently, there's nothing inside of server.js. You can take a look at it with Nano. There is nothing inside of it. We're going to get started writing our web server. So you could write it right here in the terminal, or you can write it in a code editor. So I'm just going to exit here with Control X. And here, let's use a code editor to edit server.js. So join me in our next lecture where we will start editing the file and we're going to create our web server. In our previous lecture, we initialized our project with Node and we also installed Express. In this lecture, we're going to get started building our web server. So open up server.js in a code editor of your choice. I'll be using Visual Studio, but there are many other code editors out there like Visual Studio Code, Atom, and you could even just use a text editor if you wanted to. Just make sure there's no strange formatting that's added. All right, great. So here we have server.js. We're going to get started by defining Express, which is the package that we installed that's going to help us build a web server. So we have to require the Express package by its name. Awesome. Then we're going to start a new app just by instantiating Express. So first we're requiring Express, then we are instantiating it. And now we have our application. So then we can get started with specifying where we're going to launch the web server. So for that, I'm going to use app.listen on a specific port. So here we can pass in the port number that we want to use for the project. Commonly, our port's 3000 or port 8080. These are ports on your computer that you can visit in your browser to test out the project. So I'm going to create a constant port, and I will use 3000 as my port. So that means my web server will live on port 3000 on my local host, and I'll show you how to get there shortly. So after we are listening on a port, we can then use an arrow function to open up what we want to occur once the app has actually started on a port. And we can just log out a message with console.log, and here we can say that our server has started. Okay, and we can also pass in the port number. If we wanted to, we could say on port and then pass in a formatted string here with the value of the port. And then here we would have to change these quotation marks to backticks, and that will allow us to use the formatted string. Then we want to end all of our lines with a semicolon as per convention. Okay, then we can save this file, and we can already get started launching our server with Node, and we'll be able to visit our localhost at port 3000 in a browser of our choice, and we'll be able to get this message logged out if our server has successfully been able to start on a port. To test that out, join me back in your terminal or command line application. Make sure you're inside of your project folder. Then here we're going to use Node to start the server, which is server.js. And look at that, we get the message server has started on port 3000. This tells us we were able to successfully run node server.js, and that means it can run on our local host at port 3000. We can visit this port in our browser of choice. For example, here I am in Chrome at localhost 3000. So you just type that into your URL search here. So this is our URL, localhost 3000, which means we are at port 3000. You should see this message cannot get, which means that your server is running, but you just haven't specified what to do on the home page, which is the /. It's just the website with the /, which is the home page. So later we'll specify what we want to do when we get to a page. Now in this course we're going to be focusing on back-end development, not front-end. So we're going to be working with the database and the server. We won't actually be working with the forward-facing side of the project unless it's to get data from a client. All right, so this tells us we've been able to launch our server successfully. You can test out if your server was not running with Control-C to kill the server. Then you can test what happens if your server is not running and you try to go to localhost at port 3000. You see here, now that I've killed my server, I am on localhost 3000, but instead of seeing cannot get, I actually get this site can't be reached. Localhost refused to connect. That's because I can't reach the port unless my server is running. So that's why the message cannot get / was actually a correct message. It told us that the server was running. If your server is not running, you'll see a message similar to this. The site cannot be reached. This tells me that you have to go through your code, make sure you're actually launching your server with Node, because if you are not able to see the message cannot get /, this tells me you have to make some kind of change to the project. Watch this lecture again. But if you are able to see cannot get /, that means you can join me in the next lecture. We're going to continue our project, and I'll show you how we can build a server that can auto restart. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In our previous lecture, we built out our server and tested out that it could indeed start on port 3000. Now, if we're just using Node to start our server like this, node server.js, this means that if I make a change to my project, if I change some code in server.js or any other file, I'll have to kill the server and restart it again manually. And that becomes tedious really quickly. So instead, developers commonly use the package nodemon, which is an extension of Node that will allow us to build a server that can auto restart. So all we have to do is install nodemon, and then instead of using node server.js, we use nodemon. So here I'm going to kill my server, and I'm going to use npm install nodemon to install the package to my project. And there we go, it's installed. Now I can put it to use with npx nodemon and then pass in the name of my file, server.js. So a little bit different from node server.js, we use npx nodemon server.js. And here we use npx nodemon because we didn't install nodemon globally, we just installed it into our project folder. So we have to prefix it with npx. And you could even build an alias inside of your package.json file. You could specify a script that you wanted to use a shorter command instead of npx nodemon server.js if you wanted to. So here we can see we have nodemon version 2.0.12. We can restart it manually if we wanted to with rs. It's watching our path, it's watching our extensions, it's starting node server.js. So you see it just did the command node server.js for us, and it's going to do that command for us every time it hears that we made a change. So that's why it says it's watching extensions, because it's going to watch for any files with an extension JS, MJS, JSON, and it's going to listen for anytime there's a change to our project. All right, so now that we have nodemon installed, join me in our next lecture. We're going to go back to server.js, and we're going to use some middleware to handle requests inside of our project. So I'll see you in the next lecture. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we are going to implement middleware into our project to help us handle requests from clients. So first, join me in your terminal or command line. We are going to install a package or dependency called body parser. This is going to allow us to easily parse whatever request the client is sending to the server. So it allows you to parse or clean up data that is being sent to the server. So here I'm going to kill my server temporarily with Control-C. Then I am going to install with npm install body-parser. Then there we go, it has been installed, which means now we can put to use the body parser in our project. So join me in your code editor. Here in our code editor, we are going to include a require statement at the top of our file here in server.js. We are going to create a constant body parser and require the body-parser package that we just installed. Okay, then we can put to use our body parser. So before we start listening on a port, we're going to configure our application to use our body parser.url encoded with extended set to true. That will allow us to use the body parser. Then we're also going to specify that we want to use body parser.json to get JSON data, JavaScript object notation. All right, then we can already put to use the body parser to start handling any data. Now, currently we don't have any data that we are getting, but once we start getting data sent via HTTP requests, you'll see that the body parser will come in handy because it's going to allow us to get data directly from the request. For example, if someone's sending a property of their username, we can get their username directly from the request. And we can do that thanks to this implementation of the body parser. And this package is very commonly used. This will allow us to grab data from a URL and as well grab JSON data. So join me in our next section. We're going to get started building out some data. So we're going to build a database with MongoDB, a NoSQL database. You could use a different database as well, but we're going to show you how to use MongoDB for this project. Of course, there are many other databases out there, but Mongo is quite popular. So we're going to set up our database via MongoDB, then we can connect to the database, and we can show all of our database entries inside of our server. And we can even allow the client to send data to the server, to add a new database entry, to update a database entry, even delete a database entry with HTTP requests. But the first step is actually building the database. So join me in our next section. We'll learn how to build a local database stored on our computer. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we are discussing what is a Mongo NoSQL database. Mongo is a slang term for huge because MongoDB can store a lot of data. MongoDB is popular because it's easy to use, flexible for different situations and projects, and it's scalable for large amounts of data. It's also built for speed in terms of its performance and its ease of use for developers. It is easy to read with rich document-based queries, so it's easy to make queries to the Mongo database. It has high performance because of its full index support, so you can quickly get data, create it, read it, update it, and delete it. It's also highly available with replication and failover. MongoDB is great for web applications, semi-structured content management, real-time analytics, high-speed logging, caching, and projects that require high scalability. It's popular across industries like web, software as a service, games, healthcare, finance, government, and more. MongoDB is a NoSQL database, which means not only SQL. You may also hear not SQL. NoSQL means that the database is non-tabular and non-relational, which means that it stores data differently from a relational table like MySQL or SQL or PostgreSQL. NoSQL can still store relationship data, it just stores it differently. NoSQL emerged in the late 2000s as the cost of storing data decreased. Because storing data was cheaper, complex databases were no longer required just to reduce data duplication. Instead, we could use NoSQL and therefore have better performance and ease of use. There are four major types of NoSQL databases. Number one is the document database, which stores data in documents like a JSON object. The second major type of NoSQL database is the key value database. This is a simple type that contains keys and values for each of its objects. The third major type of NoSQL database is the wide column database. This type stores data in tables, rows, and dynamic columns. And finally, the fourth major type is the graph database. This stores data in nodes and edges. There are many types of NoSQL databases that you can use depending on your project. NoSQL fully supports agile development because it doesn't statically define how the data must be modeled. NoSQL databases can operate at any scale and are used at many companies, large and small. MongoDB is one of the widely recognized NoSQL databases, one of the most common. It's open source and written in C++. Here's a visual of a Mongo database. A server can have one or more databases. Each database has different collections or tables, and each table has its own documents or rows. For example, a school database may have a course table and a students table. And then the courses table will have objects such as a web development course, which has a title and a description, and a game development course, which has a title and description. Then the students collection or table will have different student objects, such as the student Alex, which has a first name and a student ID property, as well as the student John, which has a first name and a student ID property. So the database is the physical container for collections. A database gets its own set of files on the file system. One Mongo database server typically has multiple databases, however many you need. A collection is like a table. It's a group of documents that does not enforce a schema. A document is like a record or a row in a table, and it's represented as a set of key value pairs in this example. A document has dynamic schema, which means that a document in the same collection does not need to have the same set of fields or structures. It doesn't have to have the same structure. For example, a student might have a first name and a last name, but another student might have a first name, a middle name, and a last name. The two students don't have to have the same properties. And that is an introduction to what is a MongoDB NoSQL database. Coming up, we are going to learn a lot more about MongoDB in this hands-on projects-based course. Join me in our next section. We're going to have an introduction to JavaScript for those of you who have never coded before. If you already know how to code in JavaScript, then you can skip that section and instead jump straight into our first section on MongoDB. I'll see you in your next lecture. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we are going to learn how to install Homebrew and then also how to install MongoDB on Mac. So join me here on brew.sh. This is the site for Homebrew. After we learn how to install on Mac, in the next lecture we'll talk about Windows. So here, Homebrew, the missing package manager for Mac or Linux. To install Homebrew, just copy this terminal command right here on the Homebrew homepage. You can click that clipboard icon to copy this command to your clipboard. Then let's go to the terminal on our computer. Here I am in the terminal and I'm going to just paste in that command from the Homebrew page. So here we're specifying how we are going to be installing Homebrew. We're using Bash, and then we have the link to the script for installing Homebrew. You can press enter and you'll be prompted to request your or enter in your password. This is your administrator password for your computer. Next, you'll be prompted to either hit return to continue or any other key to quit. So hit enter or return on your keyboard. Return is just the enter key. Okay, there we go, and that is going to install Homebrew. Once you have installed Homebrew, then you can go ahead and install MongoDB. Make sure you read your messages here to make sure that you are able to install Homebrew. You can also run here to grab the unshallow clone of Homebrew if you'd like, unless you would like the shallow clone. So in this case, we're using a shallow clone, which will work. It's a smaller version. You can then check your version of Homebrew with the brew command here. All right, so here if you type in brew, you'll get some prompts for available brew commands like brew update, brew upgrade, brew uninstall, brew doctor for troubleshooting are commonly used ones. You can do brew-v to grab which version of Homebrew you're currently using. All right, next up, we are going to find the MongoDB tap on Homebrew. So we'll use brew tap MongoDB/brew and we'll hit enter. Okay, next up we're going to install MongoDB. So we're going to use brew install followed by MongoDB-community. So we're grabbing the community server edition, hit enter, and that will install the MongoDB server to your computer. So just give it a moment there to complete. Next up, we are going to create a database folder for our computer. As soon as this is completed, we can do that. So right now, Brew is installing some dependencies for my MongoDB community version, getting it ready for my version of Mac. Awesome, and we have been able to get MongoDB community. To have launched Start MongoDB, Now in restart at login, you can use brew services start MongoDB brew, MongoDB community. Or if you don't want or need a background service, you can just run mongod-config. So it's good to read the messages that come up here in your terminal. All right, next up, we are going to create a database folder on our computer. And for macOS Catalina and onward, we're going to use sudo mk directory. So sudo means we're accessing our admin, and we're going to be using make directory to create a new folder. This will be a private folder, and we're going to put it in the location system volumes/data /data again, and then /db. So here, this is required for macOS because Apple created a new volume in Catalina for security. And so we have to put our database into system volumes data. You can then hit enter, and you'll be prompted to put in your password. And there we go. We've created our database folder inside of that path. We then have to get permissions or give permissions to be able to use the database. So we'll use sudo chown -r. Here we're then going to use backticks, which are next to your 1 on your keyboard, id-un, followed by /system/volumes/data/database, db. So we're giving permissions to use the folder. Great. If you don't get any error messages, it means you've been able to successfully create the commands. Next up, we can launch our MongoDB. So I'm going to use sudo to access our admin. Then I'm going to use MongoD. Following that, I'm using the property database path to use my database path at /system/volumes/data/data/db. So my path to my database is this exact path on my computer. Then I'm going to hit enter, and that is going to start my MongoDB. All right, now we can put to use our MongoDB. We can use the Mongo keyword in another terminal, and we can use MongoDB commands. If you want to build an alias for your command, this long command, first let's just hit Control-C to cancel the MongoDB. And here you can see this command is quite long, this sudo mongod, okay, because you have to pass in this database path. So if you want to create an alias here for this command, then what we can do is we can copy this command, and here I'm going to then use my alias MongoD, which means I can just use MongoD as the key for this entire command. All I have to do is use an equal sign followed by here quotation marks. Into the quotation marks, I'm going to paste in here my command that I just used, and also sometimes it doesn't work, so let me just recreate this alias. I'll exit out of that and go to alias MongoD. My copy paste didn't really work, so I'll just do it from scratch. We're using sudo mongod --database path is at system/volumes/data/data/db. We can hit enter, and now if we use MongoD, this is just a shortcut. So now we have a shortcut for being able to launch MongoDB. And that is how you can install and launch MongoDB on Mac. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, you are going to learn how to install MongoDB on Windows. It's completely free, and you don't even need an account if you're using the community server. So join me at mongodb.com/try/download/community. So you can also just search for the MongoDB community server. Here you can press download, and that is going to allow you to download this MSI file. So save the MSI file, and then double click on it and follow the prompts to install Mongo. Unless you specify a custom directory, most likely Mongo will be installed into your default files where you have all of your programs. Once you have gone through the prompts to install Mongo, join me in your command prompt application. On Windows, this is called the command prompt, also commonly called the shell, the terminal, the command line. They're all the same thing. Here we're going to create the directory or folder where Mongo will store its files. So we're going to call MD, lowercase here, and we're going to call here \data/DB. You might get the message the directory already exists. That's because I already have MongoDB. Otherwise, your folders will have this created. So wherever you are currently, here currently I'm inside of just my user account, Glitty. I've now created /data/DB. This is the default location where MongoDB will store all of its files. Now you can, next up, try running the MongoDB daemon with MongoD. Okay, now if this doesn't work, you can also just launch the exe file. So just go into your program files, find Mongo, and then launch the exe file. For example, here I am under my program files and then MongoDB. You can go into the server 5.0, the bin, and here you can see you have MongoD. This is an application. All right, and we can see that if you double click on this application, it's the same thing as running the MongoD.exe file. Okay, so you can double click on that and it'll open up a terminal. You can also here copy the path to the MongoD.exe file, and then in your terminal you can hit Control-C if you want to close the MongoD server, and then you can here don't paste in the just paste in the path itself. So if you paste in the path to your exe file in your terminal, it's the same thing as launching it. But what if you wanted to have a shortcut like just MongoD? So I'll hit Control-C here. So often you want to use a shortcut like MongoD in order to launch the exe file. You don't want to have to go through the entire path. All right, you don't want to type in this whole path every time that you want to launch the MongoDB. So for that, we can set up an environment variable that is going to allow us to just use an alias here on Windows for the exe file, and we'll do that shortly. But let's say we already have the MongoDB running here, which we do. You want to keep this open for the duration of your project, because that means your server is running, your MongoDB server is running. If you close this down, then you no longer have access to the server unless you reopen it back up. Any files that you create in your Mongo database, any databases or tables that you create, they will be stored permanently here on your computer unless you want to delete them. And you can access them as long as you have MongoD, the daemon, running. And then you can close that and open it back up any day. Now, while the MongoDB daemon is running, from a second terminal or command prompt, you want to run your Mongo application. All right, so here I'm going to create a new terminal application. So I've just launched the command prompt a second time. And here I'm going to run not my MongoD, but my Mongo.exe file. So here in my files, it is not MongoD, it's Mongo. So this is the Mongo shell. MongoD is the Mongo daemon to start the MongoDB server. Mongo itself is the shell from which I can access my Mongo database. So I can copy the path to that or just double click on it to open it, or copy the path and then paste in the path and hit enter. That will start the Mongo shell. Here we can see we're connecting to MongoDB at localhost port 27017. So this is always going to be the location and the port of MongoDB. This is a Mongo shell, and here it's been superseded by Mongosh, but they're almost the same thing. Mongosh is just an improvement. So here, feel free to install Mongosh if you'd prefer, or you can just use the Mongo shell. But Mongo and Mongosh are almost the same thing. Mongosh is just an improvement if you'd prefer to use that. And as well, Mongo shell will be deprecated and removed in an upcoming release, so just use Mongosh as the equivalent if that's what you have. So here is where we can actually put in commands for our database. Like here is where we can create a new database in MongoDB. Here's where we can create a new table, put in new entries. We do that via the Mongo shell, mongo.exe. We have to keep our MongoDB daemon running if we want to be able to access the Mongo shell. Now, as we saw, we had to use long commands. We can Control-C out of this at any time. We'll get by. We can see with the up arrow key, we had to use this long command to access Mongo, and the same thing for MongoD. So we can actually create an environment variable to allow us to use some kind of shortcut or alias for these commands. To update your Windows path environment variables, we are going to go to our control panel. So just find your control panel, then go to System and Security. Under System and Security, go to System. And here we're going to go into Advanced System Settings. Under there, we're going to go to Advanced, and we want to click on this button, Environment Variables. Here, we are going to click on Path. Under User Variables for your username, you have a bunch of different environment variables. We want to focus on the path environment variables. Here, we are going to press Edit, and this will open for us all of our path environment variables. And you can see here, I have created one for here my MongoDB, and you can also do the same for your Mongo shell. So all you have to do is hit New and then paste in the path to whatever path you want to access. Like as we had previously, we had here this path to mongo.exe. So you can copy this path to that exe file. Then you can paste it here into this program files, and then do the same for the MongoD as well. If you press OK and close and OK, then here, instead of using this command, this long command to start the Mongo shell, we can just use Mongo. Okay, just make sure there is no backslash. So now I've been able to just use Mongo to launch my command prompt here. And same thing for MongoD. I can use MongoD to just launch my MongoD executable. Now it's already in another different terminal here. In my case, I already have it launched in another terminal. But now we know that we can use Mongo and MongoD, just those aliases, because we have set our environment path variables. So that is how you can install MongoDB to a Windows computer, and how to launch a MongoDB daemon, and how to open the Mongo shell, which is where you write all of your commands to manipulate your Mongo database and any kind of databases you have in there in MongoDB. Coming up next, we're going to learn how we can actually create our own databases locally on our MongoDB right on our computer. So join me in our next section.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this course. If you want to watch the rest of the course, the link is down below. Not only will you get the access to this course, but you'll get access to a lot of other courses in a huge bundle, and it's on sale today. So buy it before the sale ends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.